Hey, welcome everyone. I'm Catherine Golfinopoulos, Education Program Manager at EcoFarm. EcoFarm's vision is to nurture just and ecologically sustainable farms and food systems through education, alliance building, celebration, and advocacy. We are based in Santa Cruz, California, and host the annual EcoFarm conference each January, now in our 41st year. Join us as we convene online for our upcoming conference, January 20th through 23rd, 2021. We have launched this Dirt First conversation series in response to the COVID pandemic in order to foster connection and information sharing through this difficult time. Our next webinar will be on fire preparedness and recovery on Tuesday, October 27th. Our hearts go out to everyone that is dealing with the effects of these disasters, and we will be posting more details on the webinar on our website soon. We would like to show our respect and acknowledge the Amah Mutsun and Rumsen Ohlone communities and elders who are the indigenous custodians of the lands on the Monterey Bay, where the EcoFarm office is based and where our annual conference is held. We invite you to add who you are and where you are calling from into the chat, which you will see to your right. And if you're not familiar with Zoom, we recommend you change your view to speaker view. I would like now to introduce Andy Fisher, who will be leading this conversation. Andy has worked in the anti-hunger field for 25 years as the executive director of national and local food groups, and as a researcher, organizer, policy advocate, and coalition builder.
Great. Hey, thanks, Catherine. I'm glad everybody's here. Appreciate y'all coming and joining us. So we're going to get going. I just first want to give you a little introduction to the webinar. And since the start of the pandemic, many social entrepreneurs have focused on linking surplus food from farmers with hunger relief efforts. And new programs have begun and existing ones have been expanded. In the second part of this webinar series, which we did one earlier in July on the CFAP program, we're going to examine the practicalities and politics of these farm to food bank programs. And we'll explore whether these are good markets for farmers and ultimately whether they make for good nutrition assistance as well. And we have 4 great speakers with you today. I'm just going to introduce them all at once. They're each going to take about 5 minutes or so to talk a little bit about their work. I'll be asking them some questions. I'll have a little bit of discussion, and we'll leave the last 10 or 15 minutes open for audience Q&A. So you can drop your questions into the chat box or into the Q&A box as you prefer. The first speaker is Steve Linkhart, who's the director of the Farm to Family program at the California Association of Food Banks. And then we'll have Audra Christophel, who's the co-director of partnerships and community impact at the Community Food Bank of Southern Arizona in Tucson, which is one of the most forward-looking food banks in the country. Then Kat Taylor, who's active in a variety of social enterprises, public benefit, and philanthropic ventures. She's the owner of the Tomcat Ranch and serves as co-founder and board chair of Beneficial State Bank, which is a community development financial institution. And then last but not least is Veronica Mazariegos, who is a co-founder and farmer at Brisa de Anio Ranch in Pescadero, California, which is an 8-acre organic diversified vegetable production farm, which is in the middle of its 3rd season. So Steve, I'm going to pass it off for you and tell us a little bit about your work with Farm to Family, please.
All right. Well, great. Thanks for having me today. So again, my name is Steve Linkhart. I run the Farm to Family program of the California Association of Food Banks. And our program began in 2005, and it started at the San Francisco Marin Food Bank as a program. And once it started to grow, they moved it over to the association in 2008. And it's grown to the point where now it's actually the largest food recovery program in the nation. So our main goal is to eliminate food waste, feed hungry people, not just in California, but across the nation. And how we do that is kind of unique. Well, we go to farmers, and we work for food banks, and we also work for the farmers. So we have 4 regional food solicitors throughout California in the growing regions. So we have somebody down in the desert, someone in the central coast area, someone in the Central Valley, and then up in the northern San Joaquin area. And what they do is they're like boots on the ground. Whenever anything comes up, they need to go talk to a farmer, they need to go walk a field, they're in the area. Most of them are from the farming industry. So, you know, they get that touch. They're right there with them. And by doing that, it really gets us, you know, in touch with the grower and makes us part of their business. And right now we average about 160 million pounds of food, of fresh fruits and vegetables a year. But in COVID time, I think we're probably going to reach close to 190 million pounds because of all the excess from the, you know, the food service industry and all of the efforts that people are putting forth to ensure that those products aren't killed under or thrown out or wasted. We currently use or go through about 50 different commodities annually. And that's pretty consistent even in the COVID times, because some of the smaller organic crops were not really, there's not enough to make a truckload and be part of our program. But working with, you know, Kat Taylor and her group, we're finding unique ways to make that happen. I'm not going to steal her thunder. I'll let her do that. And then we also have a non-produce program that we run. And this is really for food banks, and we help them with their ordering for some of the smaller food banks. And in normal times, we're shipping 5 million pounds a year. And this year, we're going to be over 50 million pounds. And that's really to help purchase food for food banks that's not fresh, but to make sure that they can get through this pandemic. And the association is really there to make that happen for them. And also, we have a small but mighty team in the office that takes care of all the ordering, procurement, the logistics. We have a full logistics component of what we do, and billing, invoicing, and reporting to food banks. So we're not a large group, but I think our impact really, you know, keeps this moving, and glad to be a part of this conversation. And I think that's about my time.
Great. Thanks a lot, Steve. That was great. Audra, can you talk a little bit about what you're doing in Tucson?
Yes, thank you. So great to be here. And I think it's great to have Arizona in contrast to California. Our landscape, our food system, the number of farmers we have to work with is very different. And so I think it's really cool to have these two examples kind of side by side. So at the Community Food Bank in Tucson, we've been working in partnerships with farmers in various ways for a very long time, more than 25 years. And historically, a lot of that was really around farmers markets and sort of direct to consumer venues. And in 2015, we really sort of dove in a little bit deeper to develop a farm to institution value chain, working with various partners and farmers to kind of tap into the demand from local institutions and build out those partnerships. That's looked like, you know, helping to play a coordination role and support farm cooperation via annual planning. We also have been able to back these advanced contracts for farmers as we've gotten this value chain going, just recognizing that that's really a key piece for farmers to be able to plan and sort of build up their scale. And so more recently, this last year in Arizona, for the first time, the state set aside an allocation to purchase local produce, dairy and meat grown in Arizona by small farmers to distribute and move through all of our food banks in the state. And so we've been working closely with the Arizona Food Bank Network on that project. And because we've had this historic partnership with farmers, we were able to sort of help set up some of those first connections and contracts with some of the smaller diversified farms down in Southern Arizona. And then sort of another component of what we're working on is really just at every turn trying to leverage the various funding streams that we have to purchase additional local produce for specific hunger relief programs. So more recently, with some CARES Act funding, we've been able to focus on purchasing more local products for our school pantry partnerships, where we work with schools and other partners, to do sort of mini distributions at sites where we know families are already going and feel comfortable. So we've been able to really ramp up our spending on local produce for those. And additionally, building out a local produce to seniors project, which essentially is working with a local distributor to order and make bags, produce bags for seniors, who is then delivering them to these senior living sites. So it's a kind of widespread in terms of the different sorts of ways that we're trying to incorporate local purchasing into our work, but that's a short summary.
Great, thanks so much, Audra. It's great for you for us to hear that story. Next up is Kat Taylor. Thanks for making it. I just want to give you about 5 minutes or so to talk about the work you're doing with Growing the Table.
Thanks. Thanks very much, Andy, and thanks for this opportunity. So just to back up a little on the issue of hunger in the first place, we did start a bank, Beneficial State Bank, based in Oakland, California, back in 2007. It's a triple bottom line organization serving racial and social justice, environmental well-being, while being financially sustainable. And our commitment is to a living wage economy where we can minimize, if not eradicate, hunger, because people are not desperate and do make enough to sustain themselves and their families. We also, my husband, Tom Steyer, and I were very involved in the Fight for 15, the objective of having a minimum wage of at least $15 an hour, including for tip workers throughout the nation. And I do think it's important to keep in focus that the point is not to just meet a perpetual need for hunger, for food aid, but to eliminate that need in the first place. And I so respect the food banks in their role in these emergency feeding programs and some of the very avant-garde work they're doing. We had a great call yesterday with the Redwood Empire Food Bank, just to take one example of the many California food banks trying to address the systemic problem of hunger and the need for food programs in the first place. Growing the Table is a complementary program to the Farm to Family Partnership that Steve just illustrated so well. We want to take the opportunity that the crisis presents to permanently shift the food supply chain in favor of racial and gender equity, environmental well-being, and economic resiliency. I think we've seen in the pandemic and the economic shutdown some of the frailties in our food system, and we seek a post-COVID food economy that's much more inclusive and presents durable supply demand channels, especially for BIPOC, LGBTQ++ regenerative organic farmers. The way we're going about this is to address 3 pain points in our feeding programs. The first is that we have 70,000 farms and ranches in the state of California, and it's very hard to do comprehensive outreach. Esri, the big geographic science company, built us a mapping platform that we have now imbued with data sets so we can identify the 17,000 farms and ranches that are recognized as women or minority owned, organic, certified, et cetera. And then we can also tell what is the socioeconomic vulnerability index of their region, where's the nearest school district, farmers market, and food bank. We also work with mostly BIPOC-led organizations on the ground who have been for decades in the business of food aid and farm support, because these types of farmers have had trouble connecting to demand and have been excluded from a lot of mainstream programs. So those are organizations like Kitchen Table Advisors, Mandela Partners, and Urban Tilth, just to name a few. That will help us, we believe, grow who gets to grow the food getting to the table, which is the first of a triple entendre. The second is to increase the volume and quality of food getting through the Farm to Family Partnership and Growing the Table. And this will be accomplished, we believe, by preferencing organic and regenerative growers whose food we believe is very, very healthy, and also serving the food banks, but also serving directly school districts, community-based organizations, and the restaurants reactivated by World Central Kitchen. so that we can increase and proliferate the delivery channels for emergency feeding programs and ultimately for permanent sources of demand. That accomplishes the growing the volume and the quality, the second entendre, and also the third entendre, which is growing who has access to the food. Because in some cases, for instance, a farm worker in Fresno may not be able to get to the food bank during its ordinary operating hours. Undocumented individuals may not feel comfortable going to certain institutions, and shut-in seniors and so on may need auxiliary delivery channels. So we're working, for instance, with Asian Business Resource and Referral Network that can do that kind of outreach, and also the United Farm Workers Foundation in Fresno, just as an example of increasing the access of who gets to eat the food at the table. But really our aim is not to create dependency upon emergency feeding programs, but to make sure that our BIPOC, regenerative, organic, LGBTQ++ female growers have resilient demand channels and can be a larger part of the market share of a post-COVID just food economy.
Great. That was wonderful, Kat. Thank you so much. Veronica, would you like to talk a little bit about Brisa de Anio?
Certainly, thank you, and thank you for inviting me to participate in this conversation. So yes, like Andy mentioned, we are Brisa de Anio Ranch. We are located in Pescadero, California, on the coast, and we, together with my farming partners Cole and Cristobal, we started Brisa de Anio. This is the middle of our third season now, and we started like so many small farms with the main goal of feeding our families and our communities, while also wanting to grow a viable farming business. And unfortunately, when it comes to small and medium farms, those two goals often conflict. And so that's something that we've been wanting to work with. And we really want to center this, figuring out if there are other ways, other markets that we can explore, while we are able to center soil building, ecosystem building, and regenerative agriculture practices, inclusivity, and the justice that we see is lacking in so much of our agricultural system. And so we started off with the traditional small farm outlets, farmers markets, and some wholesale accounts. And now we've expanded to CSA, and now these alternative markets that are really focusing on getting food into communities that need them. And so really excited to continue to explore these and see how they could be more embedded in the business models of the small farms like ours.
Great. Thank you, Veronica. Thank all of you for your summaries of what you're doing. Now I want to get into just some questions and ask you, just to get a conversation going with all of us. And we'll leave, like I said, about the last 15 minutes or so for Q&A from the audience. So the first question I had was for Steve. And I want to ask you to tell us about the impact on growers of the Farm to Family program. So, EcoFarm is obviously a farmer-oriented organization, and we'd like to know, who's participating in Farm to Family from the farmer perspective, and what are they getting out of it, and why do they get involved?
Right. So the Farm to Family program really works with larger growership or packer organizations, because our program is really built on volume. We like full truckloads. We'll take less than truckloads, but ultimately we like the volume. Food banks really, really have morphed. So 15 years ago, there was a lot of, regular manufactured items that would go to food banks. Well, over time, they got more efficient. So they had to figure out, okay, what else is out there? What can we use? And in California, obviously it's produce, and food banks really, really kicked it up. And they said, okay, look, with the Farm to Family program, we need the Farm to Family group to get out there, talk to farmers, and they really need bulk products. So we did that. And now we're shipping like the San Francisco Food Bank will get like 22 full truckloads a week from our program. The Food Bank of Silicon Valley, 28 truckloads a week. So that's volume. So it's our job to go out and find that. And really what that does for the farmers is it really makes us part of their business. When you think about all these farmers that have contracts with all the big retailers, well, when everybody goes to the store, they're looking for a perfect piece of produce or fruit or whatever it may be. So they have to ensure, especially in row crops, that they overproduce to make sure they get that diamond that ends up at the store. And all of those products that really don't make the USDA cut, well, we're there for them. And we're there to take whatever they're not able to sell. And even if it is a number one, there may be a timing issue on it. But with working with food banks, we can get that product that has a little bit shorter shelf life on it to a food bank, to a family, a lot quicker than anyone else that's out there. So we can take something that has short shelf life and really push it through the system and get it to the food banks. So the benefit for the farmers is, one, we're an outlet for them to ensure that there's no food waste. We offer a pick and pack out fee, because we really like to make sure we can do everything we can to make sure that the farmer gets something. So every item has a little bit different value to it because of nutrient dense content, whatever the secondary market may be. So for citrus, it's juice. So whatever their juice price is, we try to beat that and go over and above that price. And then also California has a really generous tax credit. So it's 15% of the wholesale value. And because we offer a pick and pack out fee, that doesn't go against the product itself. It goes towards the handling, the packaging, and the picking of the product. So the whole truckload is a donation. So that 15% can go directly towards the whole shipment that they give us, which gets them it gets them really close to whole when it's all said and done. And then my favorite thing is, it's like they're doing the right thing. They're helping feed California, people in California that need the food. And then whenever California, because food banks can only take so many potatoes, so many onions, so much citrus, this is where we go back and we work for that farmer and we move it to our partners across the country. And every week we have 20 to 40 truckloads that go to New York, they go to Ohio, they go to Chicago. I mean, we're shipping all the way across the nation and using Feeding America as our partner on that. So we try to make sure that not just food banks benefit in this, but the farmers do as well. And that's our focus. And we make sure that, whatever we do, bottom line, we're a customer service organization. And that's why we love what we do, because at the end of the day, we're just here to make people happy.
Great, thanks. So one more question for you, Steve. This program has been going on for a long time, and it's been a real boon for, like you said, for food banks in California. And I know that, some food banks in the state are distributing, 2/3 of what they distribute as produce, which is just amazing compared to what's going on in other places around the country. But just like I said, you've been going on for a long time, and with the pandemic, the state contributed funding into this program. Can you talk a little bit about that? And was that a one-off, or is that something that you see is going to continue into the future?
That's a good question. The state really did step up, and so did, Kat Taylor, and a lot of people did. Everybody saw that there was a huge need, because if everybody can go back in time, you look at, okay, what was on the news the first week of the pandemic? People were dumping produce, people were dumping milk. I mean, all ag products seem to really take a beating publicly. So it's kind of amazing how many people came out of the woodwork to say, you know what, I see a need, I'm going to fill that need because I'm stuck at home, I'm going to help out. And, with the state, they really stepped up. And working with the California Department of Food and Agriculture, Karen Ross and her team, they dove right in head first. And they were there to say, look, you tell us what you need, and we're going to do our best to make that happen. And they did a really great job. And Kat Taylor and her team did the exact same thing. And with all these people diving into this space to say, look, how can we support you to make this happen? Things happened, and it was amazing. I did a couple of webinars with CDFA, and all of the smaller farmers, there was about 200 that called me right after that webinar to say, hey, how can we work with you? How can we work with food banks? So I took every call or called everyone back, connected them directly with their local food bank, or directly working with the farm to family program. And out of that, some of the smaller farmers, even though they can't produce a full truckload, you know, we take half truckloads, so they're working with us still because of, you know, those webinars and really connecting people together. So, you know, just ultimately, I don't know whether the CDFA money is going to continue, but I know that there's a commitment from the state, Kat Taylor, to do their best to help offset produce costs for, you know, the foreseeable future. But one thing I do have to say is that food banks during, you know, regular times and even in the COVID time, they do a really great job at fundraising. And there's nothing easier to fundraise for than, you know, a piece of fruit or some vegetables that get to go to people that really can't afford it. And it's really nice. And the one thing that I really respect for the state jumping in and Kat is that food banks out there, not every food bank can afford to get the produce that they actually need. But with Kat's money, the state's money, they actually were able to do that for the first time ever. So it kind of warms the heart, and I think it's really great. So if it does continue, great. But I know that food banks, they're going to be able to fundraise locally and do what they need to do to get through this. So
great. Thanks, Steve. So Kat, I want to go turn to you because you know, Stephen has been mentioning your support, but what you explained was very different than the farm to family program in the sense it's a very different model. You know, especially when you look at the scale of its operation and who it's working with. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, you know, you're buying food from organic farmers and regenerative farmers and BIPOC and other farmers. And why go down that path? Why do you see that as important? What led you to take that on?
Sure. So we're happy to also be supporting Farm to Family, and we have raised some money and intend to raise more. We have a $15 million goal overall to support both Farm to Family and Growing the Table. Growing the Table is an effort to complement Farm to Family with a program that will support exactly those farmers you just cited, including, because I saw in the chat, small to mid-scale operators who have had a hard time getting into the Farm to Family program, just because, as Steve said, Farm to Family is a volume program to meet the demand of the food banks. Half a truckload is not feasible for a lot of the smaller growers, and a lot of the BIPOC regenerative organic growers are the smaller. So it was an attempt to bring them into the food economy in a way that permanently supports them. So for instance, in the name of living wage and sustainability, we do get to pay those farmers selected for Growing the Table with our on-the-ground BIPOC-led partners to pay for the actual cost of their harvest at wholesale, because they need that to bridge into the post-COVID food economy. And we need more participation by them because they represent the resilient, environmentally friendly, climate smart, sustainable model that is just in terms of its racial and gender participation. And in this moment of Black liberation, self-determination, joy, and all of the revolution around us to sustain a more equitable economy for all, it's important that we lead with those farmers and with those on the ground organizations. So also in terms of sustainability, we are providing capacity grants to all those connective tissue organizations, everything from helping them upgrade their food safety approaches, their software, add to their van fleets, add to their personnel in a way that will allow them to scale and provide that technical assistance and connectivity for BIPOC, LGBTQ organic farmers in the future as well. I will say also that we are going to champion in coalition with all the other advocates who are in favor of universal free school food, beginning with school lunch in California. This is an effort to end the bifurcation of student populations into free and reduced and non-participating students, to acknowledge the role that healthy food plays in a modern education, and to accord respect to those children who deserve to be well-fed as they face their school day. That, we hope, will increase the demand that school districts represent in this state. They already prepare nearly 1 billion meals every year, and we hope to connect those same preferenced farmers and ranchers to the districts to see if they can't be part of their permanent supply chain. We are able to pick up as few as 4 pallets in Growing the Table, which is another nice complement to Farm to Family, because that provides a lot more access to small to mid-scale growers. I just want to put in a word for living wage. At Beneficial State Bank, we pay 150% of living wage. You can figure out what living wage is at the MIT Living Wage Calculator that's regionally adjusted. And I want to give a shout out to the Equitable Food Initiative that is negotiating price premiums for food that has the benefit of farm worker contribution on worker safety, food safety, growing production innovations, and so on, which premium is shared back with the farm workers to shore up what have been unconscionably low wages. And we're also very much in favor of programs that allow farm workers to become farm owners. And we are considering at Tomcat Ranch literally seeding lands for farm worker to farm ownership programs.
That is fantastic, Kat. Thank you. So Audra, I want to move over to Arizona and talk to you a little bit about your food bank, because your food bank in some ways embodies both of these tendencies that we're hearing, as a very strong social justice program, but at the same time, I know you're picking up millions of pounds of produce at the Mexican border that are culls or that that are not sellable. So you're literally awash in produce, I'm sure, and you're shipping a lot out. So why are you bothering with kind of these small scale acquisitions, from a scale perspective? I mean, what's the philosophy behind doing that?
It's such a great question, Andy. And I was so excited listening to Steve and Kat talk, and I was thinking the very same thing, that I feel like within our own organization, we're kind of grappling with these same issues of, this current model that we've been using for decades is not moving the needle on hunger. We're not really seeing any real shifts, and that traditional model is not enough. And so we are starting to get really serious about what are those explicit investments we can make in these like systems oriented projects and work that really address the root causes of hunger and poverty. And I'm like Kat is saying, just like centering racial and gender equity and environmental sustainability. We recognize that if we, in Southern Arizona, right, like with all of the climate change issues that are happening with the pandemic, seeing the breakdown in our food supply chain, like we must invest in a resilient food system that's really taking all of these things into consideration. And I think key to that, right, is exactly what Kat was talking about, the livelihoods, like fair pay, living wage. And really, I think on our end, it's about looking at how do we use the resources and power that we have as an anchor institution in our community to really invest in local ownership and control of resources. And that is, sometimes in direct contradiction with the traditional model and, getting loads and loads of food. And I think where we're at in that is really asking ourselves within our organization and with our partners these questions, right, of what are the unintended consequences of what we're doing. We're starting to look at, even in our relationships and our food rescue from Mexico, what might we want to do? Like, do we want to say maybe we're going to only work with farmers who have fair trade practices and are really investing in the workers in their communities but I think it's such a complex issue, and right now where we're at is really taking a good look at what are the investments that we can make right now. And yes, we are working with very small farmers with super small scale. Our farmers could likely never fill a full truckload. And so I think, you know, more on the side of what Kat is talking about, just really focusing on like, who are those folks? How are we, you know, by investing in them, simultaneously investing in, you know, fair pay, livelihoods, the sustainability of our region. So that's where we're at.
Great, thanks, Audra. Veronica, I want to switch over to you. You've been, you know, your farm has been selling product through the Farm to Family Box program and to folks affected by the fires. And I know you have some subsidies around with your CSA. You know, from a farmer perspective, how does this work? I mean, what can you share with us any lessons you've learned along your journey?
Yes, I mean, so these programs, these alternative markets are that are both supporting low-income families and individuals, as well as individuals that for unforeseen financial strains and disasters can't access food reliably, they have become increasingly an important outlet for us. And I appreciate hearing that there's a greater emphasis in the work that you all are doing in making sure that smaller farms like ours are included in this type of work, especially because farms like ours and other BIPOC owned operations, this is central to why we're farming to begin with. So I really do appreciate that. And so this is something that we've been trying to access even before COVID. Starting last year in 2019, we started working with Fresh Approach, which started buying produce from us for their mobile markets, which target low-income communities. This year, we also had to shift our business model a bit because some of our primary outlets, namely restaurants, were affected. So we expanded our CSA, and we made the choice to be, we're trying to be as flexible as we can with our pricing, and eventually ended up, right, like you mentioned, selling to the Farmers for Families Relief Program, again, in collaboration with Farm Approach and also Pie Ranch. And more recently, in light of the fires that have affected our state, we started selling to a program that was sourcing directly from farms for chefs, both in kitchens and in farm trucks, to prepare meals for people that have been affected by these disasters. And so, although these sales haven't been, they don't represent the majority of our sales right now, they represent an amazing opportunity to not only move consistently large amounts of product, you know, and it gives us kind of a view of what this could be in the future, but also in knowing that people that need that food are recipients of it. And so as far as lessons learned, to answer your question, first of all, that this is possible with the right organizations, with the right coordination and proper resources, this type of work can happen. And from the farmer's perspective, if these programs are bigger and more, you know, kind of something that we could incorporate into our planning, they could be real important parts of our business model, which is very reassuring. I mean, I see an opportunity in which these programs could work with us as we plan our seasons and arrive at some sort of agreement, which, you know, would be huge for small farms that often have to deal with a lot of uncertainty with our markets. And another big takeaway really is the very valuable community building potential in these programs. I've seen this firsthand right now with the fire relief programs that I just mentioned. We were beneficiaries of that program. The CZU Lightning Complex fire made it to our farm, and thankfully our farm made it, but it was a very, very stressful period, and you don't know how important it was for us and comforting to have prepared meals there for us in the middle of that chaos. And as soon as we were able to restart our work in the fields, to now harvest food, knowing that this was going to go to people that were going through similar circumstances, became a source of motivation and encouragement as we kind of restarted that work. And, you know, in doing our deliveries, the chefs that were taking this food and doing what they could with it for people, they would never miss a moment to state their gratitude that they had the means to use their skills to support this effort. So really, all I could say during all of this, especially this month and a half, where I've been really hit close to home in all ways, the thought that comes to mind is that these type of programs do not necessarily need to be limited to disaster relief, that they really could be a way that we address real and systemic disparities when it comes to the access of healthy foods.
Great, thanks. No, that's a great perspective. I appreciate that, Veronica. So I'm gonna ask one more question. I want to pose it to you, to all of the panelists, and it's kind of big picture. I mean, I guess, you know, I want to preface it first by saying food insecurity has really increased in the past year. Obviously, with the pandemic, it was 10.5% in 2019. We don't know the real numbers for 2020. You know, the numbers I'm hearing coming out of Feeding America are 18 to 20% of people are food insecure in this country. So you've seen at least a 50% increase. So there's obviously huge demand and huge need. And you all know that, especially, you know, Steve and Audra, you know that very well. So I'm wondering, how do we get from these really wonderful and creative programs in which you all are trying to engage on a social justice perspective at your scales? How do you get there to a place where food, or even organic food, is a human right and we don't need charity? What's the strategy we can use, you know, in philanthropy and on the ground? Big picture. Anybody want to take a stab at that? Or am I too big?
Well, I'll jump in, and everybody hopefully will chime in too, because we don't have all the answers by any means. We're learning a lot through Growing the Table. Tomcat Ranch has actually been in the business of food systems change for some time. We do that by being a demonstration ranch around regenerative agriculture, which we believe is the way to secure our food system against shocks like we're in now, but also to scale regenerative practice to the point where it can be more competitive in the marketplace. I will never give up on the fact that we need living wage work for everybody, because everybody should be able to afford food and good, healthy food. We don't have true cost accounting in the price of food. We offload a bunch of harm and damage in the industrial food system to others that isn't reflected in the cost, and therefore we perceive it as cheap food, but it's actually quite expensive for us and our planet in terms of causing lifelong chronic disease, accelerating climate change, not respecting the biggest carbon sink left to us, which is our healthy soils. So we'll always be in that work. We'll always be in the work of big buyer demand strategies to try to shift the food supply chain. But I think this crisis is giving us a chance to see where are the pain points in our food supply chain and how can they be fixed. Personally, and philosophically, I'm committed to a more distributed system, much the way nature is, more diversity, more local food economies, more connection to community. As Veronica was saying, this is not just about food, it's about community resilience and building economic resilience as well. And I just think we're on the design side of a much better food economy. To implement Growing the Table, we're running 12 pilots around the state of California, geographically diverse, different components, different orchestration. For instance, in San Mateo County, we are working with Fresh Approach. Thank you very much. But also community-based organizations who may not have primarily been in feeding before, like Puente in Pescadero, and hoping to work with Veronica as well. So we hope through these pilots, first of all, we can raise money locally more readily because people are really concerned about their local food system. But also, if we run food deals through them, we can frugally experiment and see what works and find out where are the infrastructure bottlenecks and gaps that prevent smaller, mid-scale, organic, regenerative producers from being the mainstay of the food economy, not smaller organizations that have to fight for inclusion.
Does anybody else want to take a
Okay.
stab at that? Then we'll pass it on
Yeah.
to audience Q&A.
I'll take a stab at it. So from the farm to family perspective, we think that, having the fresh fruits and vegetables on the table should be a human right. And we do everything that we can to ensure that it's either low to no cost produce going to food banks all the time. And we do everything in our power to ensure that nothing goes to landfill. As much gets taken out of the fields as possible when possible. And that's our mission. Our mission is to ensure that nothing goes to waste. Kids get, fresh fruits and vegetables to take to school with them every day when they get to go back, if they're not back. And, it's a selling point to farmers. When you say, look, these kids otherwise can't afford to eat, row crops, broccoli, cauliflower, celery, but if they're getting it through the food bank and they, grow up eating this product, they're going to have that in their mind that, look, I grew up on this and, I'm going to need that in the future. So they're going to end up, in their adult life purchasing that product from a store, and they're, anybody that has it when they're a kid, they know they're going to need it when they're an adult. So that's one of the selling points to our farmers. And I honestly believe that actually, pans out. And like I said, we'll do anything in our power to make sure that happens.
Can I say something just really quickly? I think, we've experienced this pandemic as a way to shake us up and think about, okay, now is the time more than ever to question why we do things the way that we do and what opportunities do we have to do things differently. I think really when it comes down to it, individual food banks and food banks as a network, we have many, many resources. We have a lot of power, and we have a lot of opportunity to use those power and resources differently. I think knowing that, food banks are a business solution right now for big companies and for big ag, that we have a responsibility to really look at, like, how do we invest very specifically in local ownership and control of resources, of shifting those resources to smaller communities, and really to be very thoughtful in that.
Great, thank you. So I think I'm going to like to shift over to audience questions. We have a few in the Q&A box, and if you do have more, please drop them in. So I think this is for you, Robin, or this is for you, sorry, Veronica, from Robin Marsh. And she asked, can we get a sense from our panelists the overall and diverse impacts of COVID-19 on small to medium scale regenerative farmers in California? Are most surviving with the help of the type of buyers featured here? Do you have a perspective on that, Veronica, at all?
I think, so yeah, I have some words to say about that. So I think in general, small farmers have all had to shift what we had done. So to whatever degree, what we started the year planning that we were going to do this year, we had to change. And I think that's true for most farmers. I think that accessing some of these programs, or how flexible a farm is, that is very different, and that may be the difference in how they could adapt. So have heard of farms that have been affected to the extent that they can no longer continue. But I think for the most part, people embracing these marketing streams, marketing channels that I think were kind of on the downhill, say sort of like CSAs like we have. As far as contributing to these programs that I mentioned earlier, I think it's been hit or miss, to be honest. I think some of the programs, especially the larger USDA funded programs, have been difficult for small farmers to participate in, because of some regulations as far as certifications that need to be that the farms need to have in order to participate. So that's something to consider, that in these programs, if we want to work with smaller farmers, we need to make it flexible enough that we're not putting a really high barrier just at the onset, because that's going to make it just as difficult as other outlets. So I don't know, I can't speak to the larger numbers, but that's my sense, where there are some challenges into participating in these programs, but I think these type of dialogue makes it such that we could kind of arrive at what is needed in order to accommodate that.
Wonderful, thank you. So the next question is for Audra and Steve. And from Stuart Jacobson, who says, thank you for all your diligent and dedicated work in assisting to feed our citizens. Do food banks require a food safety certificate or food safety program from the growers to ensure that the food has been grown as safely as possible before accepting food products? And I know the gaps has been an issue for smaller farmers to sign on to, but how do you folks approach that whole issue of food safety and smaller farmers?
So in California, and probably pretty much anywhere else, I think the Good Samaritan law actually covers all of that, you know, because it says right in there, you know, wholesome food can be donated. I think that really just kind of covers that base. So as long as the intent is to donate wholesome food to a food bank, it'll cover the grower. The one thing about food banks, they all have a governing body. So Feeding America, they use a third-party vendor who comes in and goes through all of their books, their food safety, their recall procedures to ensure that whatever they receive, that they know where the product went so they can do a recall on it. But ultimately, the Good Samaritan law is what we use in California.
With some of our work with smaller farmers here in Southern Arizona, specifically related to the farm to institution value chain that we have built up, where farmers are supplying institutions like school districts and our community hospital. One of the things that we've done to sort of address, you know, for really small scale farmers, some of the high level certifications, GAP certifications, and other types of certifications, even organic certifications specifically, are really expensive and can be a little bit challenging for folks. And so we've tried to be really creative and develop best practices and peer-to-peer farm food safety practice reviews and things like that to help sort of set the stage for, again, just like a peer learning model too, to make sure like the standards are there and they're being practiced and met also within this framework of learning together.
Thanks. So I have two more questions for you, Steve. I'm going to just group them together since we're running out of time. The first one is, what are strategies to get more small and mid-sized farmers involved in farm to family? And the second one is kind of related, is are you or anybody else working to address the challenges of aggregation and distribution for small, widely distributed rural farmers such as in Humboldt County?
Okay, well, some strategies to, you know, work with farm to family is, first we got to know, you know, who you are and what you do. There are a lot of opportunities where, let's say you're close to a food bank and, you know, we can connect you directly to them, just like we've done to a couple hundred, you know, since the middle of March. I do know that some of the local food banks, instead of, you know, paying the pick and pack out fee to farm to family and then we send it over to the grower, the food banks have actually created a relationship directly with those farmers. So we can be really creative on that solution. But I think the first thing to do, reach out to me and my team, and let's see how we can be creative and make it work. But you know, if let's say you have a half a truckload that you can produce at any given time, you know, you can absolutely pick that up, because what we would do is, depending on the food bank that it would go to, we may go to another location and fill the rest of that truck out and then send it to a food bank, to where now that food bank has a half a truckload of one item and a half a truckload of another item. And, you know, a lot of mid-sized food banks, that's actually better for them, because their coolers are only so big. And if we throw 52 totes of citrus into their cooler, you know, they're landlocked with one item. But if they have 2 or 3 items in that truck, then they can take out a variety of produce, and it really works well for them. So reach out to me and see what we can do about making that work. And then same up in Humboldt County. I mean, we have a couple of food banks up that way, and Food for People, that they're up there. And we actually just helped out the Department of Food and Ag doing their senior food nutrition program. I think it's Senior Farmers Market Nutrition Program. And then we had somebody aggregate some produce and then deliver it to the Humboldt Food Bank. So I think thinking outside of the box, being creative, and finding ways to make it work. I think that, that's what we need to do. And especially with Kat's team, she's doing exactly that. She's thinking, okay, the bulk side is really taken care of, but let's take a look at the other side and make it work. So I'm here to be creative. Let me know.
Thank you. And we're going to squeeze in one more question before we go out. And Kat, I'm going to ask you to be brief. It says, everyone's harvest runs farmers markets to connect small-scale farmers, mostly organic and immigrant farmers, with environmental justice BIPOC communities in food deserts. Can we help our small-scale farmers connect with Growing the Table to increase their capacity to feed the communities we serve?
Absolutely. And I just want to highlight what's in the chat, that you can go to growingthetable.org if you have farmers in mind who we would love to reach out to, or community-based organizations who might be facilitating some of those transactions. I want to also just reiterate what Veronica was saying, that we have to work on our federal policy, because the USDA, honestly, I think is a bit co-opted by large financial incumbents in the system. The modification of the USDA Farm to Family Box program recently was to mandate that dairy and meat be providing the boxes, which eliminated a bunch of community-based organizations. And we went from dozens of grantees, or actually over 100 grantees in the first round, to a handful this round, and to very giant organizations like Cisco. So the incumbent system, which is very large, $46 billion industry in California, is inclined to lock down on its systems. And we need to, look for the cracks. That's where the light gets in, and make some change so that smaller scale producers can participate in the food economy sustainably. But please do go to growingthetable.org and lob in not only your farmers, but any suggestions you have for us trying to raise money for farm to family and trying to implement Growing the Table.
Steve, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just want to make one thing clear. So the boxes, the farmers, the family boxes, is not the farm to family program. I know a lot of people kind of cross their wires on that one, because I will never put a letter inside of a box unless it says, have a nice day. But I just want to make sure everybody, is very clear on that, because a lot of people call me. I mean, people that are actually looking for that box because they're hungry call me, and I've, probably talked to, probably 50 or 60 people, and I've, put them in touch with people to get that box. So just want to make sure everybody on the call is clear that that's not a Steve Linkhart box.
Right.
Thanks for clarifying that. It's just a confusion of the name. Sorry.
It's too close.
Does everybody
know
what the letter was? Do you know what the letter is referred to? So the president put a letter saying this box came from Donald Trump.
Yeah.
I'm going to leave it there. So it's 1 o'clock, and 1:01. We promised we'd get you off on time. So I just want to thank all the panelists for taking the time and sharing their expertise and wisdom with us. We really appreciate it, and thank you. And for all of you who have on the webinar as well, as we said, the recording is going to be available at our website at ego-farm.org. We will save the Q&A questions, and we'll ask the panelists to respond to those and get back to you. Our next webinar is in the series is going to be on October 27th. It's going to be on Indigenous fire prevention strategies. And then we have our annual conferences coming up on January 20th to the 23rd. It's called Reimagining the Future. It will be virtual this year. We will try to get you out a conference program shortly. And then the last thing I will say before we leave is please vote. Thank you. Good night. Good day. Bye.